I chose the moral question opening because this story is not about treasure. It is about truth, silence, and the cost of looking away. What would you do if the only thing you could afford was something everyone else wanted destroyed? At 31, Paige Holloway was sleeping behind a church with $1 left to her name. So when the town sold her a forgotten railway mail car for that single dollar, people laughed. But inside its rusted walls were letters that never reached the families who needed them most. And one of those letters carried her dead father's name. Before this story ends, a whole town will have to face the truth it buried in 1982. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please like and subscribe. By the time Paige Holloway bought the abandoned mail car for $1, she had already learned how quietly a life could collapse. It did not happen all at once. There was no single dramatic morning when everything disappeared. First came the hospital bills after her father's breathing worsened. Then the night classes she stopped attending because Daniel Holloway could no longer stand at the stove without trembling. Then the extra shifts at the pharmacy, the unpaid notices folded into drawers, the landlord's voice changing from patient to final, and then, one Tuesday in October, Paige placed the last box from her apartment into the back seat of her faded blue sedan and realized she had nowhere to carry it next. She was 31 years old, though lately she felt older in ways that did not show in photographs. Her dark brown hair was usually tied low at the back of her neck. Her hazel green eyes looked too awake even when she had not slept. She still wore the gray hoodie she had owned since nursing school, beneath a worn brown canvas jacket with one missing cuff button. Nursing school. The thought still hurt. There had been a time when Paige imagined herself in white shoes, with a badge clipped to her chest, walking hospital halls as someone useful, someone steady, someone who had survived hardship and turned it into a future. Instead, she cleaned offices after dark, applied for work that never called back, and slept behind the Methodist church at the edge of Briar Junction. Only one person knew. Reverend Owen Lark had found her car there, one morning before sunrise, the windows fogged from her breathing, a blanket pulled to her chin. He had not knocked on the glass. He had not asked questions she would have been too ashamed to answer. He simply left a cup of coffee on the church steps and unlocked the side door to the restroom. After that, it became an arrangement neither of them named. "You can park there as long as you need," Owen told her one morning, his voice low and even. "No one has to know." Paige had almost said thank you. Instead, she nodded because gratitude felt dangerous. Gratitude could break her open. Her father had left almost nothing behind when he died. No house, no savings, no insurance check large enough to matter. Just a small wooden box with a tarnished railroad badge, a rusted key, and a folded scrap of paper in his careful handwriting. Some messages arrived late, but not empty. Paige had read the sentence so many times the crease in the paper began to tear. She never understood it. Daniel had rarely spoken of his youth. He had worked, paid what he could, kept old pain sealed behind his tired blue eyes. On the morning everything changed, Paige went to the Briar Junction town office to ask about temporary cleaning work. The building smelled like dust, printer ink, and old heat. A woman behind the counter looked up from a stack of forms. Della Crane was 58, short and solid, with steel gray hair pinned in a tight knot and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her voice had the dry flatness of someone who had watched too many people come in desperate. "I heard there might be work at the old station," Paige said. Della slid one form aside. "Maybe hauling debris, maybe not. Council hasn't approved the budget." Paige tried not to let her disappointment show. Her eyes drifted toward the bulletin board by the door, where notices overlapped like fallen leaves. Then she saw it. Surplus property restoration agreement, old railway mail car, $1. For a moment, the words made no sense. "$1?" Paige asked. Della followed her gaze. "Not a gift. A problem." She explained it without softening a single edge. The old railway mail car had belonged to the town ever since the railroad company transferred the abandoned station property decades ago. It had sat on a sidetrack for more than 40 years. The town had no money to repair it, no reason to keep insuring it, and no patience left for complaints about broken glass and rusted steps. "If no one signs for it within 30 days, Della said, a scrap company cuts it apart. And if someone does sign, they own it for $1, provided they clean it, secure it, and pass a basic safety inspection. Until then, no occupancy, no electricity, no sleeping inside." Paige looked back at the notice, a thing nobody wanted. a thing the town had decided was easier to destroy than understand. She should have walked away. Instead, that afternoon, she drove to the old Briar Junction station. The Kansas wind moved hard across the open ground, bending the dry grass along the tracks. The station house stood beyond a chain-link fence, its red brick cracked, its windows clouded with dust. A faded sign still clung above the platform, Briar Junction Mile Line. And there, on the side rail, sat the mail car. It was longer than Paige expected, rust dark along the roofline, with peeling green paint and broken panes patched by years of dirt. It looked less like a vehicle than an old animal left behind after the herd moved on. A pickup slowed near the road. Then another. By the time Paige crossed the gravel, 3 people were watching. Walt Brimmer stepped out from beside a tow truck, with his garage name painted on the door. He was broad, red-faced, and thick around the middle, wearing a gray work jacket with Walt stitched over the pocket. A red shop rag hung from his hand. "Well," he called, "that's a new kind of desperate." Paige stopped but did not turn. Walt laughed. "Most folks without a house try buying a house, not a dead rail car." The words struck where he meant them to. Paige felt the hot rise of shame in her throat. For 1 second, she saw herself exactly as they saw her, a broke woman in worn boots, standing before a rusted wreck, pretending it could become something other than another failure. Then the wind pushed through the cracked door of the mail car, and it opened 2 inches with a low metal groan. Not welcoming, not magical, just open. Paige climbed inside. Dust floated in the pale afternoon light. The floor was soft in places, but not ruined everywhere. Wooden sorting shelves still lined one wall. Hundreds of narrow slots built for letters that had once traveled across counties and state lines. Iron hooks for mailbags hung overhead. A counter ran along the far side, scarred by time but still solid beneath her palm. It was cold, it was dirty, it was unsafe, but it had a roof. And for Paige, that made it more than a joke. She returned to the town office before closing. Della placed the agreement on the counter and reviewed every condition. 30 days to remove debris, broken windows covered, door lock replaced, inspection required, no living inside until cleared. "Do you understand what you're signing?" Della asked. Paige reached into her wallet and removed the last dollar bill she had. It was wrinkled, soft at the corners, and should have bought coffee, bread, or cess. "I understand enough," Paige said. Someone behind her gave a small laugh. Someone else whispered, "Lord help her." Della did not laugh. She stamped the agreement with the town seal, tore off Paige's copy, and slid over a ring with one rusted key attached. "You just bought yourself a lot of trouble," Della said. Paige closed her fingers around the key. "I already had that." At sunset, she went back to the station alone. The sky over Kansas had turned the color of old copper. Wind rattled through the broken glass as Paige stepped into the mail car again, carrying only a flashlight and the contract folded in her pocket. She moved slowly along the wall, wiping dust from the wooden shelves with her sleeve. One row of sorting slots had initials carved into it. Another had pencil marks too faded to read. Then, near the far end of the car, beneath a strip of splintered trim, her fingers passed over words cut into the wood. Small words, careful words. Some messages arrived late, but not empty. Paige stopped breathing. She took the folded scrap from her jacket pocket with shaking hands. Her father's handwriting stared back at her, the same sentence, the same rhythm, the same impossible weight. For a long moment, Paige stood inside the rusted mail car, while the evening wind moved around her like something searching for a way in. She had thought she bought shelter. Maybe she had bought the first piece of a story Daniel Holloway had carried to his grave. The first thing Paige Holloway learned about owning a $1 rail car was that a dollar did not buy mercy. It bought splinters. It bought rust flakes under her fingernails, cold wind through broken glass, and a 30-day deadline written in language so stiff it sounded almost personal. Clean debris, secure entry points, cover broken windows, submit to inspection, no occupancy until cleared. Della Crane reminded her of that twice in the first week. The town clerk arrived one afternoon in a gray vest and sensible shoes, clipboard tucked under one arm, her steel hair pinned tight as ever. She stood outside the mail car and watched Paige drag out a torn mattress blackened with mildew. "You missed that deadline," Della said. "The town takes it back." Paige wiped sweat from her temple with the sleeve of her faded hoodie. "I know. I am not saying it to be cruel. I know that too." Della looked as if she wanted to say more, then only marked something on the clipboard and left. Paige worked wherever she could find a few dollars. In the mornings, she wiped tables at the diner before the lunch crowd came in. Some afternoons, she helped stack feed bags at Claiborne Supply, leaving with straw dust in her hair and her shoulders burning. 3 nights a week, she emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets in a law office, where the framed diplomas on the wall reminded her of the nursing degree she had never finished. Every small paycheck became something practical: a tarp, a box of nails, work gloves from the discount bin, sandpaper, a used padlock. Reverend Owen Lark lent her a hammer, a pry bar, and a battered toolbox from the church basement. He did not ask whether she had eaten. He simply packed an extra sandwich beside the tools and pretended it was an accident. At night, Paige still slept in her sedan behind the Methodist church. She kept her shoes on in case someone knocked on the window. She folded her coat under her head and listened to the heater struggle, telling herself the rail car was not a home, not yet, but it was something with a roof and a door she had paid for. The town kept watching. Some people slowed down when they passed the old station. A few laughed. Others stared as if poverty might spread if they got too close. Walt Brimmer made a habit of driving his tow truck along the gravel road, slow enough for Paige to see his smirk through the windshield. One evening, he leaned out and called, "Still polishing that coffin?" Paige did not look up from the window frame she was sealing with plastic. "If it starts rolling, holler," Walt added. "Might charge you double to tow it." His laughter faded down the road. Paige pressed the staple gun against the plastic sheet and fired once, hard. The sharp crack echoed inside the empty rail car. For a second, she imagined the old walls absorbing the insult for her. Then a voice behind her said, "He has been loud his whole life. It has never made him wise." Paige turned. An older woman stood near the open door, holding a thermos and 2 paper cups. She was small, with a slight bend in her back, pale blue eyes behind thin glasses, and silver blonde hair clipped at her chin. A green cardigan hung loose over her shoulders, and a canvas bag full of folders rested against her hip. "I am Mavis Corder," the woman said. "I used to run the town library before they decided history could survive on half a budget." Paige almost smiled. "Paige Holloway." "I know." Mavis stepped inside carefully. "Your father fixed my furnace twice and only charged me once." That stopped Paige more sharply than Walt's mockery had. Mavis poured hot tea into a cup and handed it to her. Daniel was quiet, but not small. Paige looked down at the steam rising between her hands. No one had said anything kind about her father in weeks. At the funeral, people had offered soft phrases that sounded pre-written. "Sorry for your loss. He was a good man. Let us know if you need anything." Mavis had said one sentence, and somehow it felt heavier. "This car used to matter," Mavis said, looking at the rows of wooden sorting slots. Men worked mail on the move. Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri. Bags came in, bags went out. Briar Junction was proud of this line once. "What happened?" Mavis's expression changed. "Storm night, 1982. She touched one of the empty iron hooks. Floodwater came up over the rail yard. The mail route closed not long after. A postal man named Harold Keene was blamed for missing bags. Missing mail bags? Enough to ruin him." Mavis looked toward the far wall. "He left town in shame, or was driven out. Depends on who is telling it." Paige waited, but Mavis did not say more. For the next several days, the old mail car no longer felt simply dirty. It felt interrupted. Paige found date stamps under drawers, brittle rubber bands in corners, and a faded routing chart wedged behind a sorting shelf. She worked later than she should have, chasing daylight until it drained from the windows. One cold evening, while patching a warped panel near the rear of the car, she heard a sound inside the wall. Not scratching, not chewing, a light metallic tap. Then another. Paige froze with the hammer in her hand. The wind moved through the broken trim, and the sound came again, faint and deliberate, like a spoon touching the inside of a cup. She pressed her ear to the panel. Nothing. She stepped back and shone her flashlight along the wood. Most boards were dark with age, but one section had a slightly different grain, almost hidden beneath old paint. The nails were wrong, too, newer than the others, set unevenly. Her pulse began to climb. "Do not be stupid," she whispered. Old rail cars had old noises. Loose metal, settling wood, mice, 100 ordinary explanations. Still, she took Owen's pry bar from the toolbox. The first board resisted. The second loosened with a dry crack. Paige worked slowly, afraid of damaging whatever lay behind it, though she did not yet know whether there was anything to damage. When the panel finally shifted free, her flashlight revealed a narrow hollow space. Inside sat a navy canvas mailbag, stiff with age, tied shut with a leather strap. Paige did not move for several seconds. The bag was not large. It was not beautiful. It had no shine, no promise of money, no treasure chest glow. It looked like work, like weather, like something someone had hidden in a hurry and never returned to claim. Across the front, in faded black letters, were the words, Briar Junction, undelivered storm night 1982. Paige's hands shook as she unfastened the strap. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Yellowed envelopes, water-stained corners, old stamps, names she did not recognize. Addresses from streets that might not exist anymore. She pulled one free, then stopped. A memory came back. Owen standing beside the church coffee pot saying, "A sealed letter still belongs to someone, even if time has forgotten the address." Paige placed the envelope back. She was poor. She was desperate. She was curious enough to ache. But she would not turn strangers' private grief into something she could rummage through. Then she saw one envelope folded apart from the rest, wrapped in a strip of brittle paper. To Daniel Holloway, or his family, if this ever reaches them. Paige sat down on the dusty floor. Her father's name looked wrong in someone else's handwriting. Too alive, too reachable. She opened it. The letter was from Harold Keene. He wrote of a flood, not a grand disaster, but a chaotic night when the mail car sat on the sidetrack, and water rose fast across the yard. He wrote that 17-year-old Daniel Holloway had helped carry bags from the rail car to the station warehouse. He wrote that some bags vanished after they were moved, and that Harold was blamed before he could prove otherwise. Then came the sentence that broke something open inside Paige. Daniel was not a coward. He was a boy standing under the weight of men who knew exactly how to frighten him. Paige read it again and again until the words blurred. Her father had spent his life avoiding the old station. Paige had thought it was bitterness, or exhaustion, or just another closed room inside him. Now she saw a different possibility. Daniel Holloway had not been empty. He had been carrying a story no one let him put down. Paige took the mailbag to Mavis the next morning. The older woman went pale when she saw the faded marking. She did not touch the letters. Instead, she locked the library archive room and said, "We need someone who knows what rules still matter after 40 years. That was how they found Nora Whitlock. Nora lived 30 miles away in a brick house with trimmed hedges and no nonsense anywhere in sight. She was 64, tall, straight-backed, with brown skin, sharp dark eyes, and silver-threaded black hair cut in a neat bob. A retired postal inspector. She listened without interrupting while Paige explained the rail car, the wall, the bag, and Harold's letter. When Paige finished, Nora put on white gloves before even approaching the table. "You were right not to open the others," she said. "I wanted to. Wanting is not the test. What you do after wanting is." Nora explained that the letters were private property, historical material, and possibly evidence of misconduct. They would need to be cataloged, protected, and traced. No guessing, no gossip, no dramatic display for the town to feed on. Paige nodded, chastened but relieved. For the first time since buying the mail car, someone treated the discovery as serious instead of foolish. By dusk, Paige returned to the old station with an empty mailbag-shaped ache in her arms. She saw the damage before she reached the steps. The new padlock hung twisted from the latch. Inside, the rail car had been searched, shelves yanked open, dust smeared across the counter, her tools scattered, the loose panel torn wider, as if someone had reached into the wall and found nothing. Paige stood very still. On the floor near the sorting slots lay a torn scrap of old paper, crushed beneath a muddy boot print. Only half the sentence remained. Some messages arrived late. The rest had been ripped away. Paige picked it up carefully. Until that moment, the mailbag had felt like a secret from the past. Now it felt like a threat in the present. By the end of the second week, the old mailbag had stopped feeling like a discovery and started feeling like a crime scene. Nora Whitlock returned to Briar Junction with 2 archival boxes, a pack of white cotton gloves, acid-free folders, a portable scanner, and the expression of a woman who trusted paper more than memory. She refused to work inside the mail car. "Too much dust, too much wind, too many eyes," she said. So they used the back room of the old library, where Mavis Corder cleared a table beneath a humming fluorescent light. Paige sat across from Nora with a notebook open, her fingers stiff around a pen. "Write everything," Nora instructed. "Date found, time approximate, location inside the car, condition of the wall, condition of the bag, number of envelopes visible, postmarks, names if they can be read from the outside. Nothing opened unless there is a clear reason." Paige nodded. At first, the work felt slow enough to be useless. One envelope at a time, one photograph. one water-stained notice, one brittle corner protected instead of unfolded. But by noon, patterns began to gather on the table. The letters were not filled with treasure. They were worse than treasure. A mortgage extension notice mailed to a widow on Elgin Street. A county tax warning sent to a retired switchman. A court appointment for a family disputing an eviction. A small insurance check addressed to a man whose barn had burned that spring. A job acceptance letter from a grain company in Salina. A bank letter giving one family 10 more days to make a payment they never knew could be delayed. Paige read only what Nora allowed from the outside markings and official headings. Still, the meaning was clear enough. These were not grand documents that looked important in a glass case. They were ordinary lifelines. The kind poor people waited for, because one date, one signature, one missed reply could decide whether they kept a house or lost it. Mavis began digging through old newspapers stacked in the archive room. By evening, she had spread clippings across another table. Small articles from 1982, 1983, 1984. Families leaving town. Worker cottages bought in groups. Land around the rail yard transferred quietly. A warehouse approved where a row of cheap rentals had once stood. One name appeared again and again. Graham Brimmer. Paige looked up. Walt's father? Mavis did not answer quickly. Graham owned the tow garage back then. He was hired during the flood to move stalled vehicles and equipment near the station. Nora scanned another clipping. He did not do this alone. Mavis placed down 3 more articles. No, there was a lawyer named Harlan Voss, a property man out of Topeka, and a station supervisor named Milton Greer. Everyone knew? Paige asked. Mavis's face tightened. No, that would make it easier to hate the town. Most people only knew the story they were handed. Harold Keene lost the mail. Harold ruined families. Harold ran. Paige stared at the envelopes. It was easier to blame one man with no power than several men with keys to every door. Later that afternoon, Mavis found Daniel Holloway's name in a payroll ledger from the station. 17 years old, part-time yard help, paid weekly. Paige ran her thumb over the line as if touching it might bring him nearer. Mavis lowered her voice. Your grandmother cleaned for the Brimmer family. I remember that much. The room seemed to shrink. Paige thought of her father at 17, thin and quiet, earning a few dollars at the rail yard while his mother scrubbed floors for a man who could destroy them both. She imagined floodwater rising in the dark, men shouting over rain, mailbags carried through mud, and a boy seeing something he was too poor to accuse anyone of doing. He tried to tell someone, didn't he? Paige asked. Mavis looked away. That was answer enough. For years, Paige had thought Daniel's silence was distance. She had mistaken his closed doors for coldness. Now she wondered how many times he had looked at her and wanted to speak, only to find that fear had become a language he could no longer translate. The pressure came the next morning. Walt Brimmer found Paige outside the station while she was replacing a cracked step. He parked his tow truck sideways near the gravel and got out slowly, red shop rag twisting in his hands. You need to stop digging, he said. Paige kept the hammer in her grip. I'm fixing a step. You know what I mean. She looked up. Walt's face was hard, but there was something strained beneath it, something that did not fit his usual mockery. You're dragging dead people through the street, he said. Keene is gone, your father is gone, my father is gone. What good comes from making everyone dirty? Paige stood. The dead don't need the truth to survive, Walt. He narrowed his eyes. But the living need it, she said, if they don't want to keep eating from a table built on lies. For once, Walt did not laugh. 2 days later, Della Crane called Paige into the town office. A redevelopment company had made an offer to purchase the entire old station parcel. The number was high enough to make Della remove her glasses before saying it. The company also wanted the mail car gone. Separately, they were willing to pay Paige $20,000 if she surrendered her ownership rights and signed a statement that she had no further claim. $20,000. Paige sat in the chair opposite Della's desk and stopped hearing the room. $20,000 meant a security deposit, a bed, a working heater, tires for the sedan, medicine without choosing which bill to ignore. It meant she could stop waking up behind the church with her hands numb from cold. Della slid the papers toward her but did not push. You are not required to decide today, she said. Paige almost laughed because desperation made every decision feel due yesterday. That evening, she sat in Reverend Owen's office, while rain ticked against the church windows. The offer lay folded on her lap. Owen did not tell her to refuse it. He did not praise sacrifice or make poverty sound noble. He only asked, if your father were sitting here, do you think he would want you to sell the silence or sell the fear? Paige looked down at her hands. That night, she opened Daniel's wooden box again in the front seat of her car. Beneath the tarnished railroad badge and the rusted key was a thin metal tag she had never studied closely. She wiped it with her sleeve. A number had been stamped into it, the same number painted faintly on the side of the mail car. The next morning, Paige returned to the rail car before sunrise. She found the old sorting counter, knelt beneath it, and searched until her fingers found a small, locked compartment built into the underside. The rusted key turned once. Inside was a black route ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Harold Keene's handwriting filled the pages. Bag numbers, transfer times, names of workers present, notes from the night of the flood, which bags were carried from the car, which were moved to the station warehouse, which were never recorded again. On the final page, written slowly and deeply enough to dent the paper, was a message. If Daniel Holloway, or anyone from his family, ever finds this, let them know he was not a coward. He was a boy who carried a truth too heavy for one lifetime. Paige pressed her hand over her mouth. For the first time since her father's death, she did not feel abandoned by his silence. She felt entrusted with what he had never been allowed to say. Across town that same night, Walt Brimmer stood alone inside his father's old garage. The building smelled of motor oil, dust, and rusted tools. Walt had not opened the back storage room in years. He told himself he was looking only to prove Paige wrong, to find some harmless explanation that would let him sleep again. Instead, behind a stack of tire rims, he found a metal cash box. Inside were several old envelopes, a stained warehouse receipt, and a handwritten confession Graham Brimmer had never signed. Walt read the first page standing up. By the second, he had to sit down. By the last, the red shop rag had slipped from his hand onto the floor. For most of his life, Walt had believed his family built something out of hard work. A garage, a house, a name people recognized. Now in the yellow light of the back room, he understood that some of it had been built from silence, and some of that silence had a return address. Truth did not heal Briar Junction overnight. It did not arrive like music, or sunlight, or a clean answer that made everyone kinder by morning. It arrived in envelopes the color of old bone, in names that made people look away, in dates that proved how much damage could be done by simply keeping a letter from reaching the right hands. Nora Whitlock made that clear from the beginning. These are not souvenirs, she told Paige. They are not props. Every envelope belonged to someone before it belonged to history. So Paige learned to move slowly. She and Mavis Corder sat for hours in the library's back room, calling numbers that no longer worked, checking cemetery records, matching addresses with old property maps, and writing letters to descendants who might not want to hear from them. Nora kept every envelope cataloged. Nothing was open for display. Nothing was read aloud without permission. Some letters were handed over sealed, even when Paige desperately wanted to know what they contained. The first family slammed the door. A woman in her 60s listened just long enough to hear the name on the envelope. Then her face hardened. "My mother cried over this town enough while she was alive," she said. "Don't bring her back here for your little project." The words landed hard. Paige sat in her car afterward with the unopened letter on her lap, feeling the old shame return in a new shape. She had thought the truth would be a gift. She had not understood that sometimes truth arrived too late to feel generous. Sometimes it knocked on a door and sounded exactly like pain. That evening, she told Nora she was afraid of hurting people. Nora removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Good. That fear will keep you careful." It did. The next letter went to a middle-aged man named Curtis Bell, whose mother had left Briar Junction in 1983. The town story had always been that she walked away from her husband and children without explanation. Curtis opened the letter with shaking hands at Mavis's kitchen table. By the time he finished reading, he was crying silently. His mother had written that she was not leaving forever. She had gone to care for a sick sister and had begged her husband to wait 2 weeks before making any decisions. The letter had never arrived. By the time she returned, her family had moved, and no one told her where. Curtis folded the paper with the care of someone holding a living thing. "All my life," he whispered. "I thought she chose to disappear." Another envelope carried a mortgage extension notice meant for the grandparents of an elderly woman named Ruth Ann Pelter. Ruth Ann did not cry. She became furious. She spread the documents across the table and tapped the date with one crooked finger. They had 10 more days, she said. 10 days and nobody told them. A retired rail worker named Silas Boone received a job acceptance letter from a grain company in Salina. He read it twice, then laughed once without humor. I spent 30 years thinking no one ever gave me a chance, he said. Turns out one did. It just got locked in a bag. Word traveled after that, but not in one direction. Some people came to the station with coffee and questions. Others crossed the street rather than speak to Paige. A few accused her of trying to get money from old grief. One man shouted that digging up the past would not give anyone their land back. Paige did not argue with him because he was not entirely wrong. The past could not be repaired as neatly as a broken step. Still, the mail car changed. Not quickly. Not magically. Mavis brought student volunteers from the community college to help clean the station platform and copy newspaper records. Reverend Owen organized a Saturday work crew from the church. Though he never called it charity, Nora trained 2 volunteers to handle documents without damaging them. Della Crane found the original transfer papers proving that the town had legal authority to keep the mail car preserved if Paige met the restoration terms. When the redevelopment company pressed harder, Della stood before the council with her glasses low on her nose and said, "The agreement was valid when she signed it. It remains valid now that someone richer wants the land." It was the closest thing to a public speech Paige had ever heard from her. Then Walt Brimmer came. He arrived one evening, carrying a dented metal cash box in both hands. He looked older than he had the week before. The hard red color had drained from his face, and his shop rag was tucked into his belt like he had forgotten what to do with it. Paige met him outside the mail car. "I found this in my father's garage," Walt said. He set the box on the platform. Inside were warehouse receipts, old envelopes, and a confession Graham Brimmer had written but never signed. Walt did not ask Paige to comfort him. He did not pretend he had always wanted the truth. "I suspected pieces," he said. "For years. I chose not to ask." Paige looked at the box, then at him. "You cannot fix the past with an apology. I know, but you can stop protecting the lie." Walt nodded. "I'll bring it to the council." The meeting was held in the old station because no room in town hall could hold everyone who came. People stood along the walls, near the cracked ticket window, beneath the faded sign of the mail line. Paige faced neighbors who had laughed at her, pitied her, ignored her, or warned her to stop. She did not feel brave. She felt tired. But this time, tired did not mean defeated. She told them what had been found. Nora explained the cataloging process and why the letters had been handled carefully. Mavis read from the old newspaper clippings. Walt opened his father's metal box in front of everyone and placed the unsigned confession on the table. No one clapped. The silence was heavier than applause would have been. Not every loss could be repaid. Not every family could be found. Not every guilty person was alive to answer for what had happened. But the old lie no longer had the room to itself. In the weeks that followed, the council voted to preserve the mail car as a community history space called the Late Letter Room. A small fund was created from donations, historical society support, and contributions from families whose land holdings traced back to the old redevelopment scheme. It did not make Paige rich. It did not erase her debts, but it gave her work. Part-time, official, with a key that opened more than a car door. Paige became the first caretaker of the Late Letter Room. After the back room of the station was repaired and inspected, she was allowed to live there temporarily while she enrolled in a part-time nursing program again. The first night she slept there, she did not wake up behind a steering wheel. Months later, Paige stood inside the clean mail car beneath warm yellow lights. The wooden sorting slots had been polished but not replaced. On the wall hung a photograph of Harold Keene, a photograph of Daniel Holloway, and a map of the old Briar Junction mail route. Paige placed her father's sentence in a simple frame. Some messages arrived late, but not empty. Outside, the Kansas wind moved along the rails. For years, that sound had belonged to things leaving. Now, as Paige stood among the letters that had finally found their way home, it sounded like something returning. Sometimes the miracle we are waiting for does not arrive as a bright sign from the sky. Sometimes, God places it quietly in front of us as a forgotten door, an old letter, a second chance, or a burden we did not understand until we had the courage to carry it. Paige thought she had bought a broken rail car for $1, but what she really found was proof that no truth is ever too old for God to bring back into the light, and no life is ever too broken for Him to restore with purpose. In our daily lives, we may pass by people, places, and moments that look worthless from the outside, but God often hides meaning in the things the world laughs at. A small act of courage, a kind word, a decision to do what is right, or a truth finally spoken can become the beginning of healing for more people than we will ever know. So if you are walking through a difficult season, do not lose heart. Your story is not over. The chapter you are living now may feel heavy, but God can still use it to lead you toward hope, peace, and a purpose greater than your pain. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story made you feel, or where you are watching from. And if you believe in stories of hope, faith, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide you toward the quiet miracles He has already placed along your path.